Hello there, and welcome to Umber Dreams Archives. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight. Whatever brought you to this moment, to this quiet space where you can finally rest, I hope you'll stay a while. Take a moment to get comfortable. Let your body settle into wherever you are. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? A bedroom where the day has finally released you? A cozy corner where you can let your thoughts slow down? Wherever you are, you're exactly where you need to be. Tonight, we're going to explore the Cretaceous period. Not the moment it ended, not the catastrophic instant of the asteroid's impact, but the world that existed before. The 79 million years of beauty and complexity and thriving life that came before that final day. We'll discover what the Earth looked like when continents were still drifting apart, when flowering plants first carpeted the world in colour, when dinosaurs reached their greatest diversity and lived in ecosystems as complex and balanced as any that exist today. But don't worry, this isn't going to be a tense countdown to extinction or a dramatic race against time. Instead, we'll move slowly and carefully through a world at peace with itself, taking our time with each discovery, each ecosystem, each remarkable creature. We'll explore the climate, the geography, the intricate web of life that connected everything from the smallest flowering plant to the largest sauropod. By the end, I think you'll find not sadness for what was lost, but wonder at what existed, and peace in understanding our place in the vastness of deep time. If you enjoy these calm explorations of Earth's ancient past, a like and subscribe really helps others find their way here too. And to those already subscribed, thank you. Your presence here means more than you might realise, so settle in now. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Take a slow, deep breath and let it out even more slowly. Let's begin our slow drift backward through time, all the way to the Cretaceous. There's nowhere you need to be right now, nothing you need to do. Just listen, and let the story of this ancient world unfold. The Cretaceous is waiting for us, and it's been waiting for a very long time. The Cretaceous period began 145 million years ago. Not suddenly, not with fanfare, but as a gentle transition from what came before. The Jurassic period had ended, and the Earth was entering a new phase of its long story, though no creature alive at the time would have noticed the boundary we've drawn in hindsight. Imagine standing at that threshold, at the very beginning of the Cretaceous, looking out across a planet that would be both familiar and impossibly strange to your eyes. The sun rises and sets just as it does now, though the days are slightly shorter, just 23 hours long instead of 24. The moon hangs in the sky, closer than it is in our time, appearing larger and pulling the tides with greater force. The stars wheel overhead in patterns you wouldn't quite recognise, because 145 million years is enough time for even the stars to shift their positions in the slow dance of the galaxy. The Earth beneath your feet is restless in ways it no longer is. The supercontinent of Pangaea, which dominated the Triassic and Jurassic periods, has broken apart. But the fragments are still moving, still finding their places, still drifting across the mantle in that patient, inexorable journey that will eventually create the world map, you know. North America is separating from Europe, the Atlantic Ocean widening year by year, though so slowly that no living thing perceives the motion. South America and Africa are pulling apart too, creating the southern Atlantic in a mirror of what's happening to the north. The climate at this threshold moment is warm, warmer than our world, with no ice caps at either pole. The Arctic and Antarctic regions are forested, covered in vegetation that thrives in the long summer daylight and endures the long winter darkness. There are no grasslands yet because grasses haven't evolved. Instead, ferns carpet the understory of forests, and conifers dominate the canopy. The world is green and humid, with higher carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere creating a greenhouse effect that extends tropical and subtropical conditions far from the equator. This is the world the Cretaceous inherits from the Jurassic. The same general patterns, the same basic ecosystems, but poised on the edge of transformation. Because the Cretaceous will witness changes more profound than those of any period since the Permian extinction. Not through catastrophe, at least not yet, but through evolution, diversification, and the slow reworking of entire ecosystems. The dinosaurs that dominated the Jurassic are still here, but they're about to diversify into forms and sizes that will surpass anything that came before. And beneath the notice of those giants, small creatures are preparing to inherit the Earth, though they don't know it yet. Mammals exist, but they're tiny, most no larger than a modern rat, living in the shadows and waiting. Flowering plants are about to appear, though at this earliest moment of the Cretaceous they haven't yet evolved. Birds are just beginning to diversify from their theropod dinosaur ancestors, still learning what wings can do, still discovering what it means to fly. Standing at this beginning, looking forward across the 79 million years that stretch ahead, we can see the stage set for one of Earth's most remarkable chapters. The Cretaceous will be a time of warmth, of abundance, of life exploring every possible niche and creating ecosystems of breathtaking complexity. It will be a time when dinosaurs perfect the forms they've been developing for the previous 150 million years, when flowering plants remake the entire surface of the planet, when the seas fill with creatures as diverse and successful as any that swim there now. 145 million years ago, the Cretaceous begins its long, successful run. The world is warm, the continents are moving, and life is about to flourish in ways it never has before. And all of this is happening on an Earth that would seem, in its essentials, surprisingly familiar to a time traveller from our present. The sky is still blue, rain still falls, rivers still run to the sea. The basic rhythms of the planet continue unchanged, even as everything living on its surface transforms. And this brings us to one of the most fundamental changes that defines the Cretaceous. A change written in the very rocks and geography of the planet itself. The breakup of Pangaea is one of the great slow dramas of Earth's history, and the Cretaceous period is when this breakup accelerates and transforms the planet's geography into something approaching the configuration we know today. Picture Pangaea at the end of the Jurassic period, already fragmenting but still recognizable as pieces of a former whole. By the beginning of the Cretaceous, the northern and southern sections, Laurasia and Gondwana, are separate land masses, but the Cretaceous will see these continents fragment further, will witness the birth of ocean basins that still exist, will reshape the paths that wind and water take around the globe. The Atlantic Ocean is the youngest of Earth's great oceans, and the Cretaceous is when it truly comes into being. At the start of this period, the Atlantic is narrow, more like a wide seaway than an ocean. But every year, new oceanic crust forms at the mid-Atlantic ridge, pushing Africa and South America farther from North America and Europe. By the end of the Cretaceous period, 79 million years later, the Atlantic will be a true ocean, thousands of miles wide, a permanent barrier between continents that were once joined. This continental drift has profound consequences for life. As land masses separate, the creatures living on them evolve in isolation from their cousins on other continents. Dinosaurs on South America begin to differ from dinosaurs in Africa, even though they share common ancestors. The same pattern repeats across every fragmenting continent. Isolation leads to divergence, and divergence leads to diversity. By the end of the Cretaceous, each continent will host its own unique assemblage of species, its own variations on the basic dinosaurian themes. The separation of continents also changes the planet's climate in subtle but important ways. When land masses are joined in a supercontinent like Pangaea, ocean currents can't circulate freely. The interior of the supercontinent becomes desert-like, cut off from moderating ocean influences. But as Pangaea fragments and ocean basins open, currents can flow in new patterns, carrying warm water toward the poles and cool water toward the equator. The climate becomes more equitable, more evenly distributed, with less extreme temperature differences between the interior and the coasts. The Tethys Sea, a vast tropical ocean that separated the northern and southern continents, reaches its maximum extent during the Cretaceous. This warm, shallow sea is a nursery for marine life, producing diversity that rivals modern coral reefs. Ammonites, those spiral-shelled cephalopods, radiate into hundreds of species in the Tethys. Marine reptiles like plesiosaurs and mosasaurs hunt in its waters. The seafloor accumulates the shells and skeletons of countless organisms, layers that will eventually become the chalk deposits that give the Cretaceous its name. The word Cretaceous comes from Creta, the Latin word for chalk, referring to the extensive chalk cliffs formed during this period in places like Dover, England. India during the Cretaceous is an island continent, separated from both Africa and Asia, drifting northward across the Indian Ocean. It won't reach Asia and buckle into the Himalayas for millions of years after the Cretaceous ends. For now, it's isolated, hosting its own unique dinosaur fauna, its own evolutionary experiments. Madagascar too is breaking away from Africa, beginning its long isolation that will produce in later ages one of Earth's most distinctive biological communities. Even North America is being reshaped during the Cretaceous. The Western Interior Seaway, a shallow sea, will eventually split the continent in two, running from the Gulf of Mexico to the Arctic Ocean. Laramidia, the western portion, and Appalachia, the eastern portion, will be separated by this seaway for millions of years. The famous dinosaurs of the late Cretaceous, Tyrannosaurus and Triceratops, live on the western shore of this inland sea, while different dinosaurs inhabit the eastern coast. The seaway itself is home to enormous marine reptiles, giant sea turtles, and fish that would dwarf their modern descendants. All of this movement, all of this geological reshaping, happens too slowly for any individual organism to perceive, but over millions of years it creates the stage on which the Cretaceous drama unfolds. The continents provide the settings, the isolated stages on which different casts of characters evolve and interact, creating ecosystems unlike anything that existed before or will exist again. And it's the climate of these continents, the warmth and humidity that bathes most of the Cretaceous world, that sets the conditions for life to flourish. The Cretaceous period is one of the warmest intervals in Earth's entire history. If you could step into this world, the first thing you'd notice, even before the dinosaurs or the unfamiliar plants, would be the heat, the warmth, the thick, humid air that feels like being wrapped in a warm, damp blanket no matter where on Earth you stand. There are no ice caps during most of the Cretaceous. The Arctic and Antarctic regions, today locked in permanent ice, are forested. Polar temperatures during the Cretaceous summers might reach a pleasant 20 degrees Celsius, similar to a mild spring day in the temperate zones today. Winters are dark, yes, as they must be at high latitudes, but not lethally cold. Trees endure the months of darkness and then flourish again when the sun returns. Some dinosaurs remarkably live year-round in these polar forests, adapted to the seasonal extremes of light and temperature in ways we're still working to fully understand. The tropics, meanwhile, are even warmer than they are today. Sea surface temperatures in tropical oceans might reach 35 degrees Celsius or higher, approaching the limits of what many marine organisms can tolerate. Yet life thrives in these warm seas, suggesting that Cretaceous marine creatures were adapted to heat in ways their modern descendants are not. The overall global average temperature is perhaps 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, warmer than our current world, a difference that seems small until you consider that our Earth, with its ice caps and cool polar regions, is itself cooler than most of Earth's geological history. What creates this greenhouse world? Primarily it's carbon dioxide. The Cretaceous atmosphere contains perhaps 4 to 6 times as much carbon dioxide as our pre-industrial atmosphere. This CO2 comes from volcanic activity, from the mid-ocean ridges creating new crust, from the general geological activity of a planet whose interior heat drives constant change at the surface. The greenhouse effect is strong, trapping heat, preventing it from radiating back into space. keeping the planet's surface warm even at high latitudes where the sun's rays strike at shallow angles. The high sea levels of the Cretaceous are both a cause and an effect of this warmth. With no ice caps to lock up water, sea levels are perhaps 100 to 200 meters higher than today. Shallow seas flood the continent's interiors, creating vast epicontinental seas like the western interior seaway of North America. These shallow seas are warm, even near the poles, and they moderate the climate of the continents themselves. Where today we might have continental interiors that swing between hot summers and cold winters, in the Cretaceous these regions experience more equitable temperatures year-round, tempered by the proximity of warm water. The lack of ice caps creates another effect: reduced temperature gradients between the poles and the equator. Today, the difference between tropical and polar temperatures drives much of our weather, creating the jet streams, the storm tracks, the general circulation of the atmosphere. In the Cretaceous, with warm poles and hot tropics, this temperature difference is smaller. The atmosphere circulates differently. Storms, when they form, might be less intense because there's less temperature contrast to drive them. The climate is generally more stable, more predictable, with fewer extreme events than our modern world experiences. Yet this doesn't mean the Cretaceous climate is monotonous or unchanging. There are still seasons, still variations in rainfall, still differences between maritime and continental climates. The monsoons still develop in tropical regions as land heats and cools relative to the ocean. Storm systems still track across the mid-latitudes. What changes is the intensity, the extremes. The Cretaceous world is generally gentler, more equitable, with weather that varies but rarely reaches the extremes of heat or cold that our world experiences. This warmth, this greenhouse climate, persists for most of the Cretaceous period. There are fluctuations, cooler intervals and warmer ones, but the overall pattern holds. The Earth is a warm, wet, gentle place, at least in terms of its physical climate. And in this warm, wet world, life explodes into forms and diversity that rival or exceed any other period in Earth's history. The warmth creates opportunities, niches for plants and animals to exploit, energy to drive the biological processes that build complexity. The climate sets the stage, creates the background conditions, but it's the living world that makes the Cretaceous remarkable. And at the foundation of that living world, literally and figuratively, are the plants. For the first 30 or 40 million years of the Cretaceous period, the world of plants looks much as it did in the Jurassic. Ferns carpet the forest floor. Conifers tower overhead, their needles and cones unchanged in basic design from species that existed 50 million years earlier. Cycads, palm-like plants with stiff fronds and strange, primitive reproductive structures, dot the understory. Ginkgos grow alongside streams. The plant world is green, successful, and seemingly stable. But sometime around 130 million years ago, perhaps in a tropical forest in what is now Southeast Asia, something extraordinary happens. A plant produces a flower. Not the complex, showy flowers we think of today, but something simpler, modified leaves clustered together, bearing reproductive structures in a new configuration. This innovation, this new way of reproducing, is so successful that it will spread across the entire planet within 40 million years, remaking every terrestrial ecosystem in the process. These are the angiosperms, the flowering plants, and their arrival during the Cretaceous is one of the most important evolutionary events in the history of life on land. Before flowers, plants relied on wind to carry pollen from one individual to another. It's an inefficient process, requiring plants to produce enormous quantities of pollen in the hope that some small fraction will reach its destination. But flowers create a new possibility: recruitment of animals as pollinators. The first flowers are small, probably inconspicuous, likely pollinated by insects that visit them for pollen or nectar. But the evolutionary arms race between flowers and pollinators begins immediately and accelerates rapidly. Flowers that produce more nectar attract more pollinators. Pollinators that specialize on particular flowers become more efficient. Colors evolve to attract specific insects. Shapes evolve to accommodate specific pollinators and exclude others. Within millions of years, the diversity of flowering plants begins to rival and then exceed the diversity of all other plant groups combined. This is a revolution, but it's a quiet one, happening beneath the notice of the giant dinosaurs who continue to dominate the visible landscape. Yet it affects those dinosaurs profoundly. Flowering plants include the first grasses, though true grasslands won't develop until after the Cretaceous ends. They include plants with nutritious fruits designed to attract animals who will eat the fruit and disperse the seeds in their droppings. They include plants with various chemical defenses, co-evolving with the herbivores that eat them in an endless dance of adaptation and counter-adaptation. By the late Cretaceous, flowering plants dominate the world's forests. The change is complete. Where early Cretaceous forests were dark understories beneath conifer canopies, late Cretaceous forests are complex layers of flowering shrubs, vines, small trees, and herbs, with conifers often relegated to upland areas or poor soils where flowering plants compete less effectively. The world has become more colourful as well. Before flowers, the dominant colours of vegetation were green and brown. With flowers come reds, yellows, purples, whites, every colour that can attract a pollinator or signal ripeness to a fruit disperser. The co-evolution between flowering plants and insects during the Cretaceous drives diversification in both groups. Bees appear, though they won't reach their full diversity until later. Butterflies and moths diversify to take advantage of flower nectar. Beetles evolve forms specialised for visiting flowers. Each new flower species creates opportunities for new insect species, and each new insect creates selective pressure for new flower adaptations. The result is an explosion of diversity in both groups that continues to this day. This botanical revolution also changes the nutrient cycles of forests and other ecosystems. Flowering plants often grow faster than conifers, cycling nutrients more quickly through ecosystems. They produce different types of leaf litter, which decomposes differently, which affects soil chemistry, which affects what else can grow. The arrival of flowering plants literally changes the ground beneath every creature's feet, altering ecosystems in ways both obvious and subtle. And yet, to a dinosaur walking through a late Cretaceous forest, concerned with finding food or avoiding predators, the flowers might not seem particularly important. The trees still provide shelter. Plants still provide food for herbivores. The fundamental structure of the ecosystem, predators eating herbivores eating plants, remains unchanged. What has changed is the diversity, the complexity, the sheer number of species interacting in ever more specialised ways. The stage is set now. Continents drifting apart, climate warm and equitable, flowering plants remaking the world's vegetation, and on this stage the actors are ready to perform. While the land is transforming with the spread of flowering plants, the oceans of the Cretaceous are undergoing their own revolution, developing ecosystems as complex and diverse as any the Earth has known. The seas are warm, even at depth, and they're full of life in forms both familiar and utterly strange to modern eyes. The Cretaceous oceans are higher than today's seas, flooding low-lying areas of the continents and creating vast shallow water environments perfect for marine life. These shallow epicontinental seas are warm, well-lit and nutrient-rich, serving as nurseries for countless species. The western interior seaway of North America is one such sea, but similar environments exist on every continent. The Tethys Sea, stretching across what is now southern Europe and northern Africa, is perhaps the richest marine environment on Earth, a tropical paradise teeming with life. In these warm waters swim creatures that would look alien to a modern diver. Ammonites, those spiral-shelled cephalopods, related to modern nautilus and squid, reach their peak diversity during the Cretaceous. Some are tiny, no larger than a coin. Others grow to massive sizes, with shells 2 meters across, drifting through the water using jet propulsion. Extending tentacles to capture prey, their shells are works of art, divided into chambers by intricate walls, the whole structure designed to provide buoyancy while minimizing weight. When an ammonite dies, its shell often fossilizes, preserving details so fine that we can sometimes see the color patterns that decorated the shell in life. Alongside the ammonites swim creatures even more impressive, the marine reptiles. These are not dinosaurs, though they live in the same period. They're a diverse group of reptiles that returned to the sea from land ancestors, evolving into forms perfectly adapted for life in the water. Plesiosaurs are among the most distinctive, with barrel-shaped bodies, 4 large flippers, and long necks that allow them to snake their heads through schools of fish, snapping up prey. Some species have necks longer than their bodies, creating a form unlike anything swimming in modern oceans. The mosasaurs appear later in the Cretaceous, evolving from land-dwelling lizards and quickly growing to enormous sizes. By the late Cretaceous, some mosasaurs reach lengths of 15 meters or more, apex predators that hunt everything from fish to sea turtles to other marine reptiles. They're sleek and powerful, with tails adapted for rapid swimming and jaws lined with backward curving teeth, perfect for gripping slippery prey. In the western interior seaway, mosasaurs are the dominant predators, filling the ecological role that great white sharks fill in modern oceans. Sea turtles too thrive in Cretaceous seas. Some, like our chalon, grow to massive sizes, with shells measuring more than 4 meters long. These gentle giants paddle through warm waters, feeding on jellyfish and soft-bodied invertebrates, occasionally hauling out on beaches to lay their eggs. The basic body plan of sea turtles is so successful that it persists essentially unchanged from the Cretaceous to the present, a design perfected 100 million years ago and still working perfectly today. The seafloor of the Cretaceous is covered in chalky ooze, the accumulated shells of countless microscopic organisms called coccolithophores. These tiny algae, each one invisible to the naked eye, produce intricate plates of calcium carbonate that protect their cells. When they die, these plates sink to the seafloor, accumulating layer upon layer, century after century, million after million years. Eventually these layers compress into chalk, the same chalk that forms the White Cliffs of Dover and gives the Cretaceous period its name. Reefs in the Cretaceous are built not by modern corals, but by a group of bivalves called rudists. These strange clams anchor themselves to the seafloor, building massive cone-shaped shells that grow tightly packed together, creating structures as large and complex as modern coral reefs. On these reefs, and around them, live countless other species: sea urchins, starfish, crustaceans, fish of every description. The reef ecosystems of the Cretaceous are as biodiverse as modern coral reefs, supporting intricate food webs and providing habitat for thousands of species. The oceans are productive, teeming with life from the sunlit surface to the dark depths. Energy flows from photosynthetic plankton to small fish to larger predators in chains as complex as any on land. And just as on land, this productivity is built on the foundation of the planet's warm, stable climate and the high sea levels that create vast areas of shallow, productive water. The seas are ancient, but they're also familiar in their essentials. The sauropods are among Earth's most successful designs for large herbivores, and during the Cretaceous, they continue to thrive on every continent, though they're evolving into forms quite different from their Jurassic ancestors. These are the long-necked, long-tailed dinosaurs that capture our imagination. The creatures so large that they challenge our understanding of what biological systems can achieve. In the early Cretaceous, South America hosts some of the largest land animals that have ever existed. Argentinosaurus, known from fragmentary remains but estimated from those fragments to weigh perhaps 70 to 100 tons, browses on the vegetation of floodplains and forests. Its neck extends meters into the air. reaching foliage no other herbivore can access. Its legs are massive columns, supporting weight that would crush the bones of almost any other creature. Each footfall leaves an imprint deep in the soft earth, a temporary monument to the passage of something almost incomprehensibly large. But sauropods aren't simply scaled-up versions of smaller animals. They're precisely engineered for their size, with adaptations that make their immense bulk possible. Their bones are not solid but pneumatic, filled with air sacs connected to their respiratory system, creating structures that are both strong and light. Their necks are long but not heavy, the vertebrae hollowed out and reduced to thin struts and sheets of bone that provide strength while minimizing mass. This pneumatic skeleton system is similar to that of birds, their distant descendants. And it's one of the innovations that makes their size achievable. Their metabolism is another adaptation. Sauropods are not simply giant reptiles, cold-blooded and sluggish. Evidence suggests they maintain body temperatures higher than their environment, though whether through true warm-bloodedness or through sheer bulk that retains heat is still debated. At their size, even if they produce heat at reptilian rates, they would retain that heat so efficiently that their body temperature would remain elevated. This gigantothermy, as it's sometimes called, would give them active metabolisms capable of supporting their large bodies without requiring the enormous food intake that a truly warm-blooded animal of their size would need. The social behavior of sauropods adds another layer to their success. Evidence from trackways suggests they move in herds, sometimes organized by size with juveniles in the center and adults on the periphery. This herding behavior provides protection for the young and perhaps makes it easier to locate food resources. A herd of sauropods moving through a forest is like a slow-motion natural disaster, stripping trees of foliage, trampling undergrowth, leaving a path of devastation that will take years to regrow. Yet this disturbance creates opportunities for other species, opening the canopy and allowing light to reach the forest floor, creating patches of new growth that other herbivores can exploit. Different continents host different sauropod lineages during the Cretaceous. South America is home to the Tyrannosaurs, a group that will eventually spread to other continents and become the dominant sauropods of the late Cretaceous. Some Tyrannosaurs develop armor, bony plates embedded in their skin that provide protection from predators. North America, during the early Cretaceous, hosts brachiosaurids, those high-shouldered sauropods with front legs longer than their hind legs, giving them a giraffe-like profile that allows them to browse even higher than other sauropods. The ecological role of these giants is profound. They're the dominant herbivores in many ecosystems, consuming vegetation at rates measured in hundreds of kilograms per day. This consumption shapes plant communities, favouring species that can regrow quickly after being browsed or that produce defences against herbivory. Their dung fertilises the forest floor, returning nutrients to the soil and distributing seeds across vast distances. A sauropod's digestive system is long and efficient but not perfect, and seeds that pass through undigested are deposited miles from where they were eaten, often in a nutrient-rich package perfect for germination. Even in death, sauropods shape their world. When a 70-ton animal dies, its body is a bonanza for scavengers, providing food for weeks or months. The bones, massive and dense, weather slowly, sometimes remaining visible for years, becoming landmarks in the landscape. Monuments to the creature that fell. The sauropods persist through the Cretaceous, surviving and thriving even as the world around them changes. They're there at the beginning of the period and still there at the end, a testament to the success of their basic design. While sauropods dominate the niches for enormous herbivores, another group of dinosaurs is evolving solutions to different ecological challenges. The ornithopods, a diverse group of beaked dinosaurs, range from small, agile runners to massive animals that rival sauropods in weight, and they're among the most successful dinosaurs of the Cretaceous period. The defining features of ornithopods seem simple at first. A beak for cropping vegetation, teeth arranged in batteries for grinding plant material, and bodies that can move on either 2 legs or 4, depending on the situation. But these simple features allow for remarkable diversity and success, from the tiny Hypsilophodon, scarcely larger than a modern turkey, to the massive Shantungosaurus, weighing 15 tons or more. Ornithopods exploit nearly every terrestrial herbivore niche available. The hadrosaurs, or duck-billed dinosaurs, are perhaps the most distinctive ornithopods. They appear in the mid-Cretaceous and quickly spread across the northern hemisphere, becoming the dominant large herbivores in many ecosystems by the late Cretaceous. Their name comes from their broad, flattened snouts, vaguely duck-like in profile, though more specialized than any modern bird's bill. This beak is perfect for stripping leaves from branches or cropping low-growing vegetation, and behind it lies one of the most sophisticated feeding systems ever evolved. A hadrosaur's teeth are not individual units, but batteries containing hundreds of teeth packed tightly together, creating continuous grinding surfaces. As teeth wear down from use, new teeth replace them from below, a conveyor belt system that ensures the animal always has fresh, sharp teeth for processing tough plant material. This dental battery allows hadrosaurs to eat vegetation that would be indigestible to other herbivores, giving them access to food resources other dinosaurs can't exploit. The crests that adorn many hadrosaur species are among the most striking features of any Cretaceous dinosaur. Parasaurolophus sports a long, curved tube extending back from its skull, a hollow structure connected to its nasal passages. Corythosaurus has a tall, rounded crest. Lambeosaurus has a hatchet-shaped forward-pointing crest with a backward-pointing spike. These crests serve multiple functions. They're visual signals, allowing individuals to recognize their own species and perhaps to assess the health and vigor of potential mates. They're acoustic resonators, with the hollow passages inside creating distinctive calls that can carry across long distances, allowing herds to stay in contact in dense forests, or calling others to water sources or feeding areas. Evidence from bone beds, sites where dozens or hundreds of hadrosaur skeletons are found together, suggests these dinosaurs live in large herds. These herds offer protection through numbers. A predator approaching a herd has many targets to choose from, but also many eyes watching for danger. Hadrosaurs may also nest colonially, laying their eggs in large groups where adult supervision can protect many nests at once. Some hadrosaur nesting sites show evidence of parental care, with adults returning to nests to tend hatchlings, a behavior that suggests a complexity of social interaction, unusual in reptiles but common in birds, the dinosaurs' descendants. The iguanodonts, relatives of the hadrosaurs, are successful throughout the Cretaceous, particularly in the early Cretaceous before hadrosaurs become common. Iguanodon itself is a common dinosaur in early Cretaceous Europe. A large animal capable of moving on either 2 legs or 4, with distinctive thumb spikes that may serve for defense or for breaking into tough plant structures. Other iguanodonts develop different specializations. Some become partially aquatic, others specialize on upland vegetation, each finding a niche where their particular combination of features gives them an advantage. The small ornithopods, often lumped together as hypsilophodontids, though this is probably not a natural group, are the rabbits and deer of the Cretaceous world. They're fast, alert and cautious, feeding in open areas but always ready to flee to cover. Their large eyes suggest good vision, essential for spotting predators. Their light build and long hind legs make them quick runners. They probably live in small groups, relying on speed and vigilance to avoid the carnivores that hunt them. What makes ornithopods so successful is their flexibility, their ability to exploit different food sources and different habitats, without requiring the extreme specializations of some other dinosaur groups. They can eat tough, fibrous vegetation, but they can also crop tender shoots. They can run quickly when necessary, but they can also move slowly and carefully when feeding. This generalist strategy serves them well throughout the Cretaceous, allowing them to persist and diversify even as the world around them changes. And in the same forests where ornithopods browse peacefully, predators are evolving their own sophisticated solutions to the challenge of survival. The tyrannosaurs are not always the massive apex predators we know from the late Cretaceous. For most of the Cretaceous period, they're medium-sized predators, agile and quick, filling ecological roles quite different from those they'll eventually occupy. Understanding their story requires patience, because it's a story that unfolds across millions of years, a slow accumulation of changes that will eventually produce some of the most formidable predators ever to walk on land. In the early Cretaceous, tyrannosaurs like Yutyrannus prowl the forests of what is now China. Yutyrannus is large by early Cretaceous standards, perhaps 9 meters long, but it's built for different hunting strategies than its late Cretaceous descendants. It's lighter, more graceful, with longer arms that actually serve a function in grasping prey. And remarkably, we know from fossil evidence that Yutyrannus is covered in feathers, long filamentous structures that provide insulation in the relatively cool climate of northern Asia. These are not flight feathers, but simple hair-like structures. Proof that at least some tyrannosaurs never lost the feather covering inherited from their earlier ancestors. The function of these feathers in a large predator is probably thermoregulation, helping to maintain stable body temperature in environments where temperatures fluctuate between day and night or between seasons. But feathers might also serve for display, patterns and colours that signal species identity or individual fitness to potential mates or rivals. We'll never know the colours. Sadly, but we can imagine patterns as varied and striking as those of modern birds, making these predators not just dangerous but beautiful. As the Cretaceous progresses, tyrannosaurs evolve along different paths on different continents. In Asia, some lineages become increasingly specialised for hunting large prey, developing the massive heads and crushing bite forces that will characterise the late Cretaceous tyrannosaurs. In North America, tyrannosaurs remain relatively rare until the late Cretaceous, when they suddenly expand and diversify, filling niches left empty by the decline of other large predators. Tyrannosaurus rex itself doesn't appear until very late in the Cretaceous, perhaps just 2 or 3 million years before the period ends. When it does appear, it's the culmination of millions of years of evolution toward a very specific predatory strategy: maximum bite force, minimum running cost, optimized for hunting the largest available prey. T-Rex is built like no other predator, with a massive skull, jaws capable of delivering the strongest bite force of any land animal, and teeth designed not to slash but to crush and tear, capable of penetrating bone and ripping away massive chunks of flesh. The arms of T-Rex are famously tiny, so small they seem almost comical, but they're not vestigial. They're strongly muscled, tipped with sharp claws, and positioned to help the animal rise from a resting position, or perhaps to grip prey in close quarters. The reduction in arm size is an optimization, reducing unnecessary weight at the front of the body and allowing the head to become even larger without throwing the animal off balance. Every feature of T-Rex is a trade-off, a choice made by natural selection to maximize success in its particular ecological role. The hunting strategy of large tyrannosaurs is probably ambush predation, using their excellent binocular vision to spot prey from a distance, then accelerating in a short, powerful rush to close the gap before the prey can escape. Their top speed is debated, but it's probably not much more than 25 or 30 kilometers per hour, fast enough to catch most large herbivores in a surprise attack, but not fast enough for extended chases. The kill comes from the bite, jaws closing with enough force to crush bone, teeth sinking deep into flesh, inflicting wounds that would cause rapid death from blood loss even if the initial attack doesn't immediately kill. Yet tyrannosaurs are not mindless killing machines. Evidence suggests they care for their young, protecting nests, and perhaps even bringing food to juveniles too small to hunt effectively on their own. They may live in loose family groups, though probably not in coordinated hunting packs like some modern predators. Their brains show developed regions for processing visual and olfactory information, suggesting complex sensory awareness of their environment. The tyrannosaurs represent one solution to the challenge of being a large predator in a world of large prey. But they're not the only solution, and other predators share the Cretaceous world with them. The skies above the Cretaceous world belong to creatures that are not birds, though birds exist and are diversifying. These are the pterosaurs, flying reptiles that have ruled the air since the Triassic period and reached their peak diversity and maximum sizes during the Cretaceous. To understand the Cretaceous world, we must look up, because much of its life happens in the dimension we rarely consider when we think of dinosaurs. Pterosaurs are not dinosaurs, though they're closely related and share common ancestors. They're a distinct lineage that solved the problem of flight long before birds did, evolving wings not from modified arms with feathers, but from arms with a single, enormously elongated fourth finger supporting a membrane of skin and muscle. This design is fundamentally different from a bird's wing, and it allows for different flight styles and capabilities. The small pterosaurs of the Cretaceous continue the patterns established in earlier periods. Pterodactyloid pterosaurs with short tails and long necks fly over the oceans, diving for fish, their beaks equipped with straining mechanisms to filter small prey from the water. Some have elaborate crests rising from their skulls, structures that serve for species recognition and perhaps sexual selection, males with larger or more colourful crests attracting more mates. These crests are often delicate, made of thin bone and probably covered with skin, possibly brightly coloured, creating visual signals visible from great distances. But it's the giant pterosaurs that truly define the Cretaceous skies. Quetzalcoatlus, appearing in the late Cretaceous of North America, is the largest known flying animal, with a wingspan approaching 11 metres, as wide as a small plane. When you try to picture an animal this size flying, your intuition rebels. How can something so large get off the ground? How can it stay aloft? How can its bones support its weight? The answer lies in extreme adaptation for flight. Quetzalcoatlus is impossibly light for its size, with bones even more pneumatic than those of sauropods, reduced to thin shells of bone surrounding empty space. Its entire skeleton probably weighs no more than 70 or 80 kilograms, less than an adult human. Yet it can span its wings across empty air and remain aloft for hours. Its flight muscles, attached to a large breastbone, provide the power needed for takeoff and for powered flight when thermals are unavailable. But much of its flight is probably soaring, using its massive wings to ride updrafts and thermal currents, covering vast distances with minimal energy expenditure. The lifestyle of giant pterosaurs is still debated, but evidence suggests Quetzalcoatlus and its relatives are terrestrial stalkers when not flying, walking on all fours across the landscape, using their toothless beaks to probe for small prey or to scavenge carcasses. They're equally at home on the ground and in the air, launching themselves into flight with a powerful leap using their wing arms, then catching the wind and rising effortlessly into the sky. From above, they scan the landscape with keen eyes, watching for carrion, for small dinosaurs they can snatch up, for any opportunity that might present itself. Smaller pterosaurs occupy different ecological niches. Some are aerial insectivores, catching flying insects on the wing with wide-opening mouths lined with needle-like teeth. Others are fish-eaters, plunging into the water from flight or swimming on the surface, using their beaks to snap up prey. Still others probe in mud for invertebrates, their long delicate beaks perfectly suited for sensing and capturing hidden prey. The diversity of pterosaur forms and feeding strategies creates a tiered aerial ecosystem. Small pterosaurs hunt insects at low altitudes. Medium-sized species patrol shorelines and rivers. Giant pterosaurs soar at heights, where their keen vision gives them a commanding view of the landscape below. Each has its niche, its particular way of making a living in the three-dimensional space above the Earth's surface. The existence of these flying giants alongside birds creates a dynamic aerial environment. Birds during the Cretaceous are already diversifying, experimenting with different forms and strategies, but they haven't yet evolved the range of sizes and specializations they'll achieve after the pterosaurs are gone. For now, the two groups coexist, each dominant in different niches, each successful in its own way. When you imagine a Cretaceous landscape, remember to look up. The skies are not empty. They're full of life, of wings and beaks and crests, of creatures that dwarf any flying animal alive today. While dinosaurs dominate the land and pterosaurs rule the air, the oceans of the Cretaceous are home to their own suite of remarkable predators. These marine reptiles are not dinosaurs, not pterosaurs, but distinct lineages that returned to the sea from terrestrial ancestors and evolved into forms as specialized for aquatic life as any shark or whale. The mosasaurs are perhaps the most successful of all Cretaceous marine predators, and their story is one of rapid evolution and expansion. They first appear in the fossil record around 100 million years ago, early in the late Cretaceous, probably evolving from semi-aquatic monitor lizards. Within just 20 million years, they've diversified into dozens of species and spread to oceans worldwide, becoming the apex predators in nearly every marine environment. Mosasaurus itself, the animal that gives the group its name, is a massive predator reaching lengths of 12 to 15 meters, with some estimates suggesting even larger individuals. Its body is streamlined, built for powerful swimming through the water column. The tail is the primary means of propulsion, featuring a large and deep fluke that provides thrust. The limbs are modified into paddles used for maneuvering rather than propulsion. The skull is large and powerful, filled with rows of sharp, backward curving teeth, designed to grip slippery prey like fish and squid. But mosasaurs are not simply aquatic lizards. They're highly specialized, with adaptations that allow them to live their entire lives at sea. They give birth to live young rather than laying eggs, eliminating any need to return to land. Their bones show evidence of pachyostosis, increased bone density that helps with buoyancy control, allowing them to maintain neutral buoyancy at depth. Their nostrils are positioned high on the snout, allowing them to breathe while most of the head remains submerged. Different mosasaur species specialize on different prey. Some have robust, crushing teeth designed for feeding on ammonites and other hard-shelled prey, their jaws powerful enough to crack shells 2 or 3 inches thick. Others have more delicate teeth suited for catching fast-moving fish. The larger species probably hunt sea turtles, plesiosaurs, and even other mosasaurs, their size allowing them to tackle prey that smaller predators can't handle. Stomach contents from well-preserved fossils show incredible diversity in diet, confirming that mosasaurs are opportunistic predators willing to eat almost anything they can catch. The plesiosaurs, meanwhile, represent a different solution to marine life. They've been around longer than mosasaurs, evolving in the Triassic period and persisting through the Jurassic into the Cretaceous. Their body plan is unique. 4 large wing-like flippers that they use to fly through the water in a motion somewhere between swimming and flight. Long-necked plesiosaurs use their extended necks to snake their heads through schools of fish, their relatively small heads minimizing disturbance until the jaws close. Short-necked pliosaurs have massive heads and jaws, hunting larger prey through speed and power. Elasmosaurs are the most extreme of the long-necked plesiosaurs, with necks containing 70 or more vertebrae, creating a structure longer than the body and tail combined. The function of such an extreme neck length is still debated. Perhaps it allows feeding in shallow water while the body remains in deeper water, out of sight of prey. Perhaps it's a specialized tool for herding fish into tighter schools before striking. Whatever its exact function, it's successful enough that elasmosaurs persist throughout the late Cretaceous, remaining common in marine environments worldwide. The sea turtles of the Cretaceous include both species recognizable as relatives of modern turtles, and forms that are entirely extinct. Archelon, mentioned earlier, is the largest sea turtle ever known, with a shell more than 4 meters long. But alongside these giants swim smaller species, closer in size to modern sea turtles, pursuing similar lifestyles of eating jellyfish, seagrass, and soft-bodied invertebrates. The basic turtle body plan, protected by a shell, propelled by powerful flippers, is so successful that it persists essentially unchanged for 100 million years and counting. These marine reptiles share the Cretaceous seas with sharks, bony fish, ammonites, and countless invertebrates, creating ecosystems as complex as those on land. The food chains are long, running from microscopic plankton through small fish to medium predators to apex predators like large mosasaurs and pliosaurs. Energy flows from the sun through photosynthesis in surface waters down through the water column to the deep sea, supporting life at every depth. And as we move deeper into the Cretaceous, we find these marine ecosystems becoming even richer. A Cretaceous forest is not a single uniform environment, but a series of distinct layers, each with its own characteristic plants, animals, and ecological relationships. Understanding these layers helps us appreciate the complexity and richness of late Cretaceous ecosystems, revealing a world as sophisticated and interconnected as any modern rainforest. The canopy layer, where the tallest trees spread their crowns, is perhaps 50 to 60 meters above the ground in the tallest forests. During the early Cretaceous, this canopy is dominated by conifers, those ancient trees that have persisted since the Carboniferous period. Their needle-like leaves resist water loss, an adaptation originally evolved for dry conditions but useful in the seasonally dry climates of some Cretaceous regions. Araucarias, relatives of modern monkey puzzle trees, are common in southern hemisphere forests. Redwoods and their relatives tower in the forests of North America, but as the Cretaceous progresses and flowering plants diversify, the canopy changes. Deciduous flowering trees begin to appear, their broad leaves more efficient at capturing sunlight than conifer needles. These trees shed their leaves in response to dry seasons or cold, carpeting the forest floor with fresh litter that decomposes quickly in the warm, humid climate. The deciduous habit, dropping leaves when conditions are unfavorable, allows these trees to conserve water and nutrients while giving up the ability to photosynthesize year-round. The middle layer, or understory, is where much of the forest diversity lives. Small trees, perhaps 10 to 20 meters tall, fill the space below the canopy. Cycads, those primitive seed plants with palm-like fronds, are common in the understory of many Cretaceous forests. Tree ferns provide vertical structure, their fibrous trunks supporting crowns of delicate fronds that capture the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy above. Shrubs and saplings of canopy species compete for space and light, waiting for a gap in the canopy that will allow them to grow taller. This middle layer is home to many small dinosaurs. Parrot-beaked herbivores browse on cycad fronds. Small theropods hunt insects and small vertebrates among the branches. Pterosaurs roost in the trees, clinging to branches with their wing claws when not in flight. The calls of these creatures fill the forest with sound, creating an acoustic environment as rich as any modern jungle. The shrub layer, closer to the ground, becomes increasingly diverse as flowering plants evolve. In early Cretaceous forests, this layer is dominated by ferns, their delicate fronds carpeting the ground beneath the trees. But in late Cretaceous forests, flowering shrubs and herbaceous plants add new complexity. These plants grow quickly, taking advantage of any gap in the canopy that allows sunlight to reach the forest floor. They produce flowers to attract insect pollinators and fruits to attract animals that will disperse their seeds. The shrub layer becomes a three-dimensional maze of stems, leaves, flowers, and fruits, supporting an incredible diversity of insects, small vertebrates, and the larger animals that hunt them. The forest floor itself is a world of decomposition and renewal. Leaf litter from the canopy above accumulates in drifts, providing habitat for countless invertebrates, fungi, and microorganisms. These decomposers break down dead plant material, releasing nutrients back into the soil, where they can be taken up by plant roots and cycled back into living tissue. This nutrient cycling is fundamental to forest productivity, allowing the same soil to support successive generations of forest growth without being depleted. Large dinosaurs move through all these layers, though they interact with them differently. Sauropods reach up into the canopy with their long necks, browsing on leaves and branches that no other herbivore can access. Hadrosaurs feed in the shrub layer and on low-hanging branches, their duck-like bills perfect for stripping leaves. Small ornithopods graze on ferns and low-growing plants on the forest floor. Each herbivore has its feeding height, its preferred plants, its particular way of extracting energy from the forest productivity. The predators, too, are distributed across these layers. Small theropods hunt in the canopy and understory. Medium-sized predators prowl the forest floor, alert for the sounds and smells of prey. The largest predators move deliberately through the forest, using size and power to take down the largest herbivores. Each layer of the forest supports its own food web, its own community of organisms interacting in patterns of predation, competition, and mutualism. What emerges from this layered structure is an ecosystem of remarkable complexity and stability, capable of supporting an enormous biomass of animal life. The rivers of the Cretaceous are not simply waterways, but dynamic systems that shape the landscape and create some of the most productive habitats on the planet. These rivers meander across low-lying continental interiors, flooding seasonally to deposit nutrient-rich sediment across vast floodplains, creating environments where life flourishes in abundance and diversity. In regions like the river systems of Cretaceous North America, the landscape is defined by these waterways. The Hell Creek Formation, which preserves the last dinosaur ecosystems before the end of the period, represents a coastal lowland crossed by meandering rivers that flow from the rising Rocky Mountains to the western interior seaway. These rivers shift their courses over decades and centuries, cutting new channels, abandoning old ones, creating a mosaic of active channels, oxbow lakes, wetlands, and well-drained uplands. The seasonal flooding of these rivers is predictable and essential to the ecosystem's productivity. During wet seasons, rivers overflow their banks, spreading water and sediment across floodplains that might extend for kilometers from the main channel. This flooding deposits a thin layer of fresh sediment, rich in minerals eroded from uplands, revitalizing the soil and creating perfect conditions for plant growth. As the floodwaters recede, they leave behind pools and wetlands that persist through the dry season, providing water and habitat when other areas dry out. These floodplain forests are among the most productive habitats in the Cretaceous world. The combination of abundant water, fertile soil, and warm climate supports dense vegetation, which in turn supports enormous populations of herbivores. Herds of hadrosaurs migrate seasonally, moving to follow the best feeding areas as different parts of the floodplain green up after flooding. Ceratopsians, the horned dinosaurs, gather in large numbers along river corridors where vegetation is lushest. Ankylosaurs, those armoured herbivores, browse more selectively on particular plants, their specialised digestive systems allowing them to extract nutrients from tough, fibrous vegetation. The rivers themselves are full of life. Large fish, including relatives of modern gars and sturgeons, hunt in the murky water. Crocodilians, some reaching enormous sizes, patrol the rivers and flood pools. Dinosuchus, a relative of modern alligators, grows to lengths of 10 meters or more, large enough to prey on dinosaurs that come to drink at the water's edge. Turtles, both aquatic and semi-terrestrial species, are common in river environments, feeding on fish, invertebrates, and aquatic plants. The interface between river and land is particularly rich in life. Mudflats exposed during low water attract shorebird-like dinosaurs that probe for invertebrates. Dense riparian vegetation provides cover for small dinosaurs and nesting sites for pterosaurs. Floating plants create mats of vegetation that shelter fish and provide platforms for insects. This ecotone, the boundary zone between aquatic and terrestrial environments, supports species from both and creates opportunities for ecological specialization. Drought periods, when they come, concentrate animals around remaining water sources. Rivers that normally flow wide and shallow shrink to narrow channels or isolated pools. Floodplain forests that were lush during wet seasons become dry and brown. Herbivores gather around the few remaining water sources, creating concentrations that attract predators. These dry seasons test the resilience of ecosystems, favouring species that can tolerate water stress or that can migrate to find better conditions. But the river systems of the Cretaceous are generally reliable, flowing year-round even during dry seasons, fed by winter snowmelt in distant mountains, or by groundwater sources that buffer against surface water fluctuations. This reliability makes river corridors into highways for migration, routes that herbivores follow seasonally to exploit different resources or to find better conditions. Predators, in turn, follow the herbivores, creating patterns of movement that pulse through the ecosystem with the changing seasons. The sediments deposited by these rivers become the rocks that preserve much of our fossil record of Cretaceous life. When a dinosaur dies near a river, and its body is buried by river sediments, the bones may be fossilized, preserved for millions of years until erosion eventually exposes them again. The river environments are particularly good at creating fossils because they rapidly bury remains in sediment that excludes oxygen and slows decay. Many of our best dinosaur fossils come from river deposits, allowing us to reconstruct these ecosystems in remarkable detail. Standing on the bank of a Cretaceous river, you'd see a landscape of abundance and activity, of water and life intermingling in patterns that have persisted since plants first colonized the land hundreds of millions of years earlier, and which will continue in modified form long after the Cretaceous ends. Every ecosystem is held together by connections, invisible threads running between species, linking predator to prey, plant to herbivore. Decomposer to dead material in intricate networks called food webs. In the Cretaceous world, these food webs are as complex as those of any modern ecosystem, supporting hundreds or thousands of species in patterns of interdependence that create stability and resilience. At the foundation of every terrestrial food web are the primary producers, the plants that capture energy from sunlight and convert it into living tissue through photosynthesis. In Cretaceous ecosystems, this includes conifers, ferns, cycads, and increasingly flowering plants. Each plant species represents a different package of energy and nutrients, some easier to digest than others, some defended by thorns or toxic chemicals, some available only seasonally when they produce new growth or fruits. The diversity of plant species creates diversity in the herbivores that eat them, as different species specialize on different plant resources. The herbivores occupy the next level, consuming plant material and converting it into animal tissue. But quote 3 is too simple a category to capture the real complexity. Some herbivores are browsers, selecting particular plants or plant parts and leaving others untouched. Sauropods browsing on high canopy foliage are browsers, others are grazers, consuming whatever low-growing vegetation is available. Small ornithopods feeding on ferns and low shrubs are grazers. Still others are frugivores, specializing on fruits and seeds. These feeding specialists partition the available plant resources, allowing multiple herbivore species to coexist in the same forest without directly competing for exactly the same food. The herbivores, in turn, support the carnivores. Small theropod dinosaurs hunt small ornithopods, lizards, early mammals, and other small vertebrates. Medium-sized predators take down medium-sized herbivores. The largest predators, Tyrannosaurs in North America or Abelisaurids in South America, hunt the largest available prey. But even these apex predators are not simply killers. They're also scavengers, opportunistically feeding on animals that died from other causes. A dead sauropod is a resource bonanza, providing food for weeks, first for the apex predators that can drive other scavengers away, then for smaller predators, and finally for the truly small scavengers, insects, and other invertebrates that consume the last scraps of tissue. The food webs extend beyond these obvious predator-prey relationships into more subtle interactions. Pollination mutualisms link flowering plants to their insect pollinators, creating dependencies where neither partner can thrive without the other. Seed dispersal mutualisms connect fruit-eating dinosaurs to the plants, whose seeds they spread in their droppings. Parasites, though rarely preserved in the fossil records, certainly exist, extracting energy from their hosts without killing them immediately, adding another layer of complexity to the food web. The decomposers, while less visible than dinosaurs, are equally essential to ecosystem function. When a plant drops its leaves or a dinosaur dies, fungi and bacteria break down the complex organic molecules, returning simple nutrients to the soil. Detritivores, organisms that feed on dead material, accelerate this process. Dung beetles and other invertebrates process dinosaur feces, breaking it down and distributing it across the landscape. Carrion beetles, flies, and their larvae consume dead animal tissue that predators leave behind. This decomposition is what allows nutrients to cycle through the ecosystem repeatedly, rather than being locked up in dead organic matter. The complexity of these food webs creates stability through redundancy. If one species declines or disappears, others can fill its ecological role, at least partially. If a predator species goes extinct, other predators may expand their prey base to include species the extinct predator once consumed. If a plant species becomes less common, herbivores can switch to alternative food sources. This buffering effect makes diverse ecosystems more resilient to disturbances than simple ecosystems with few species. Yet this complexity also creates vulnerabilities. Keystone species, those whose ecological role is disproportionately important to ecosystem function, can be critical points of failure. The extinction of a keystone pollinator might cascade through the ecosystem, causing the decline of the plants it pollinates, which in turn affects the herbivores that eat those plants and the predators that eat those herbivores. These cascading effects can amplify small perturbations into major ecosystem reorganizations. In the Cretaceous world before the final catastrophe, these food webs are stable, mature, refined by millions of years of evolution and ecological interaction. The ecosystems are resilient, capable of recovering from droughts, floods, volcanic eruptions, and other natural disturbances. They represent the peak of dinosaurian ecological success, balanced systems where energy flows from sun to plant to herbivore to carnivore to decomposer in cycles that have persisted for geological ages. And this balance holds not just in one ecosystem but across many, each with its own particular assemblage of species but all sharing the same fundamental structure. Even in the warm, equitable climate of the Cretaceous, seasons exist and shape the rhythms of life. The tilt of Earth's axis creates seasonal variation in day length and solar intensity, even if it doesn't create the extreme temperature swings familiar from modern temperate regions. Understanding these seasonal patterns helps us see the Cretaceous world not as a static tableau, but as a dynamic system where organisms respond to predictable environmental changes. In tropical and subtropical regions, where most Cretaceous dinosaur diversity is concentrated, seasons are marked less by temperature changes than by rainfall patterns. Many areas experience distinct wet and dry seasons, driven by seasonal shifts in atmospheric circulation patterns. During the wet season, heavy rains fall regularly, maintaining high soil moisture, keeping rivers full, and allowing vegetation to grow luxuriantly. This is the season of plenty, when food is abundant and conditions are favourable for reproduction. Many herbivorous dinosaurs time their nesting to coincide with the wet season, ensuring that hatchlings emerge when food is plentiful and when adults can more easily find the nutrition needed to produce eggs and care for young. The dry season, by contrast, is a time of stress and concentration. Rainfall becomes infrequent or stops entirely. Rivers shrink to narrow channels or isolated pools. Vegetation becomes dormant, and the lush green landscape turns brown and dusty. Herbivores must range more widely to find adequate food, and they concentrate around the few remaining water sources. This concentration creates opportunities for predators, but also increases competition among herbivores and stress from crowding. Some species probably migrate during the dry season, moving to areas where conditions remain favourable, then returning when the rains begin again. In higher latitudes, seasonal variation takes a different form. While temperatures remain mild by modern standards, thanks to the warm global climate, the variation in day length becomes extreme. Above the Arctic Circle during the Cretaceous, the sun doesn't set for weeks or months during summer, then doesn't rise for an equivalent period during winter. Plants and animals adapted to these conditions must cope with months of continuous daylight, followed by months of darkness, a challenge that requires specialized adaptations. The polar forests of the Cretaceous show adaptations to this light regime. Deciduous trees drop their leaves during the dark winter months when photosynthesis is impossible, conserving energy and preventing damage from freezing temperatures on the rare occasions when they occur. Evergreen trees remain active, maintaining their leaves year-round, perhaps photosynthesize during the brief twilight periods even in midwinter, or storing energy during the summer to support metabolic needs through the winter darkness. The dinosaurs living in these polar regions, including hadrosaurs and small theropods, must cope with both the darkness and the cooler temperatures. Evidence suggests some may migrate, moving to lower latitudes for the winter and returning for the summer, following patterns similar to modern caribou or migratory birds. Others apparently remain year-round, enduring the darkness by becoming less active, reducing energy expenditure, perhaps entering states of reduced metabolism similar to hibernation, though whether dinosaurs are capable of true hibernation remains uncertain. The seasonal cycles of the Cretaceous also include longer-term variations in climate, driven by orbital cycles that affect how much solar energy reaches different parts of the Earth. These Milankovitch cycles, with periods of tens to hundreds of thousands of years, cause subtle shifts in climate that create longer droughts or wetter periods. Species adapted to one climate regime may struggle during unfavourable phases of these cycles, their populations declining only to recover when favourable conditions return. This cyclical environmental variation creates selection pressures that favour generalist species capable of tolerating a range of conditions over specialists tied to narrow environmental requirements. The reproductive cycles of many Cretaceous organisms are timed to these seasonal patterns. Flowering plants time their blooming to coincide with the activity periods of their pollinators. Herbivores time their breeding to ensure young are born when food is abundant. Predators, in turn, may time their breeding to coincide with the abundance of prey that follows herbivore reproductive seasons. These interconnected cycles create a temporal structure to the ecosystem, a choreography of life events that repeats annually, shaping not just when things happen, but how species interact with each other. Standing in a Cretaceous landscape and observing for a full year would reveal these rhythms, the subtle shifts in vegetation, the movements of animals, the pulses of abundance and scarcity that define life in even the most stable climates. The Cretaceous world is not frozen in time but dynamic, changing with the seasons even as its fundamental structure remains constant year after year, century after century, million after million years. But even as these seasonal patterns repeat, the world itself continues to change in slower, deeper ways. The Cretaceous period spans 79 million years, and during that immense stretch of time, the Earth's geography continues its slow, relentless transformation. The continents that begin the Cretaceous in one configuration end it in another, and this shifting geography has profound effects on climate, ocean circulation, and the distribution of life across the planet. At the beginning of the Cretaceous, 145 million years ago, the Atlantic Ocean is narrow, barely more than a seaway separating the Americas from Europe and Africa. By the end of the period, 66 million years ago, the Atlantic has widened to thousands of kilometres, becoming a true ocean basin with its own circulation patterns, its own mid-ocean ridge-spreading system, its own deep water environments. This widening happens at rates of perhaps 1 to 2 centimetres per year, imperceptibly slow in any one lifetime but accumulating to massive changes over millions of years. The Western Interior Seaway of North America provides a remarkable example of how geography shapes ecosystems during the Cretaceous. This shallow sea doesn't exist at the beginning of the period, but by the mid-Cretaceous it floods the low-lying interior of the continent, splitting North America into two landmasses, Laramidia to the west and Appalachia to the east. This seaway persists for millions of years, creating a marine environment in what is now Kansas, Colorado and Montana, while isolating the dinosaur populations on either side and allowing them to evolve in different directions. The seaway itself is a dynamic environment, advancing and retreating as global sea levels rise and fall, as tectonic forces raise or lower the land, as sediment fills the basin or erosion deepens it. At its maximum extent, the seaway might be 1,000 kilometers wide, a warm, shallow sea teeming with marine life. Mosasaurs patrol its depths, giant sea turtles cruise the surface, ammonites drift through the water column in vast numbers. The seafloor accumulates thick layers of sediment eroded from the rising Rocky Mountains to the west, layers that will eventually become the Pierre Shale and other formations rich in marine fossils. The dinosaurs of Laramidia, isolated by the seaway from their relatives to the east, evolved their own distinctive forms. The hadrosaurs and ceratopsians of the late Cretaceous American West are products of this isolation, lineages that diverge from their ancestors millions of years earlier and developed their own specialized features in response to local conditions. We know less about the dinosaurs of Appalachia because fewer rocks of the right age are exposed there, but what fossils we have suggest they're different from their western relatives, confirming that the seaway truly did divide the continent's fauna. India's journey across the Indian Ocean is another remarkable feature of Cretaceous geography. At the beginning of the period, India is part of Gondwana, the southern supercontinent attached to Madagascar and Antarctica. But as the Cretaceous progresses, India breaks away and begins drifting northward, crossing thousands of kilometers of ocean as it moves toward its eventual collision with Asia. This collision won't happen until after the Cretaceous ends, but the journey is underway. India, an island continent carrying its own unique flora and fauna across the equator. The separation of South America and Africa continues throughout the Cretaceous, the South Atlantic widening as the North Atlantic did before it. By the late Cretaceous, the connection between these continents is gone entirely, the South Atlantic a true ocean with its own circulation patterns. This separation has biological consequences, as the dinosaurs of South America diverge from those of Africa, each continent developing its own characteristic fauna. The abelisaurids, those strange predatory dinosaurs with short, deep skulls and often reduced forelimbs, dominate southern hemisphere predator niches, filling roles that tyrannosaurs fill in the north. The general pattern during the Cretaceous is fragmentation, the breakup of the old supercontinent into smaller pieces that drift apart and isolate their populations. This fragmentation drives diversification, as populations separated by growing ocean basins evolve independently, creating new species, new genera, new families. The global diversity of dinosaurs increases through the Cretaceous partly because of this geographic fragmentation, each continent or large island becoming its own evolutionary laboratory. Yet even as the continents separate, life finds ways to disperse between them. Ocean currents carry organisms across expanding ocean basins. Floating vegetation rafts transport small animals from one landmass to another. Birds, now beginning to diversify, can fly across water barriers that ground-dwelling animals cannot cross. These dispersal events are rare, but over millions of years they happen often enough to create surprising biogeographic patterns, species appearing in unexpected places far from where we think they originated. The shifting geography creates a dynamic stage for the Cretaceous drama. Continents moving, seas rising and falling, barriers appearing and disappearing, and through it all, life adapting, evolving, persisting. The late Cretaceous, roughly the final 20 million years of the period, represents the zenith of dinosaurian success, a time when these creatures reach their maximum diversity and occupy virtually every terrestrial ecological niche available. This is not a world in decline, not an ecosystem showing signs of imminent collapse. This is, by every measure we can apply, a world at its peak, thriving and stable, refined by millions of years of evolution into ecosystems as sophisticated as any the Earth has known. The number of dinosaur species during the late Cretaceous likely numbers in the hundreds or thousands, though we've discovered only a fraction of them in the fossil record. Every continent hosts its own distinctive dinosaur fauna. North America's Laramidia is home to hadrosaurs like Edmontosaurus and Parasaurolophus, ceratopsians like Triceratops and Pachyrhinosaurus, ankylosaurs like Ankylosaurus and Euoplocephalus, and predators including Tyrannosaurus rex, and smaller forms like Dromaeosaurus and Troodon. Asia hosts its own assemblage, including smaller tyrannosaurs like Tarbosaurus, the enormous sauropod Sauroposeidon, various hadrosaurs, and protoceratopsians. South America is dominated by different groups entirely, with abellisaurid predators like Carnotaurus and titanosaur sauropods like Saltosaurus. This diversity extends beyond the familiar large dinosaurs to include forms we rarely see in popular depictions. Therizinosaurs, bizarre herbivorous theropods with enormous claws and potbellies, reached their peak diversity in the late Cretaceous of Asia and North America. Oviraptorosaurs, parrot-beaked dinosaurs with elaborate crests and often feathered bodies, diversify into numerous species. Pachycephalosaurs, those thick-skulled herbivores, become common in Asian and North American ecosystems. Each of these lineages represents a different evolutionary experiment, a different solution to the challenges of Cretaceous life. The herbivore diversity is particularly striking, with multiple species often coexisting in the same ecosystem by partitioning resources in various ways. Some feed high in the canopy, others in the understory, still others on ground-level vegetation. Some are selective browsers, choosing particular plants or plant parts. Others are bulk feeders, consuming whatever vegetation is available. This resource partitioning allows high species diversity without excessive competition, creating ecosystems where 10 or 15 herbivore species might live in the same forest, each exploiting a slightly different niche. The predator diversity reflects the herbivore diversity, with multiple carnivore species coexisting by hunting different prey, using different hunting strategies, or focusing on different size classes of victims. Large tyrannosaurs hunt adult hadrosaurs and ceratopsians. Medium-sized predators take juveniles of large species or adults of smaller species. Small theropods hunt even smaller prey, including mammals, lizards, and juvenile dinosaurs. Scavengers, including some species that are primarily predators but will scavenge when opportunity allows, clean up carcasses that other predators leave behind. The result is an efficient ecosystem where little energy is wasted, where almost every potential food source has some species adapted to exploit it. This peak diversity is not limited to dinosaurs. Mammals during the late Cretaceous are more diverse than often appreciated, including not just tiny insectivores, but also forms that grow to considerable sizes, some perhaps approaching 20 kilograms. These mammals are mostly nocturnal, avoiding the day-active dinosaurs, occupying the nighttime niche the way small mammals do in modern ecosystems dominated by large herbivorous mammals and large predators. Their diversity includes insectivores, herbivores, and even possible carnivores, creating miniature mammal ecosystems operating in parallel with the dinosaur-dominated daytime world. The invertebrates reach peak diversity too, with insects having radiated into most of the ecological roles they occupy today. Ants, though they first appeared in the Cretaceous, are beginning to diversify and will eventually become dominant elements in many ecosystems. But even in the late Cretaceous, they're already showing signs of the social complexity that will make them so successful. Bees are diversifying alongside flowering plants, developing ever more specialized relationships with particular flower types. Beetles, already diverse earlier in the Cretaceous, continue to radiate into new forms and new ecological niches. The late Cretaceous world is a mosaic of ecosystems, each with its own character, its own assemblage of species, its own particular balance of predators, herbivores, and plants. Coastal ecosystems differ from inland ones. Floodplain forests differ from upland forests. Polar regions host different species than tropical zones, yet all share certain fundamental features: the presence of dinosaurs as dominant large animals, flowering plants as dominant vegetation, and complex food webs linking hundreds or thousands of species in intricate patterns of interdependence. This is the world that, unknown to the creatures living in it, has only a few million years remaining, a world about to be transformed in ways that will end one chapter of Earth's history and begin another. The dinosaurs of the latest Cretaceous, those species living in the final million years of the period, are not diminished or declining versions of earlier forms, but fully developed, successful animals representing the culmination of their lineage's evolutionary histories. Looking at them, we see creatures as well adapted to their environments as any modern mammal, showing no signs that their time is running out, no warnings of impending catastrophe. Triceratops. One of the last and largest ceratopsians roams the forests and plains of western North America in the final million years of the Cretaceous. With its massive skull, 3 prominent horns and large bony frill, it's one of the most recognizable dinosaurs, an icon of the late Cretaceous. Adults might weigh 8 or 9 tons, comparable to a large elephant, with skulls approaching 3 meters in length. These massive heads serve multiple functions. The horns are weapons for defense against predators or for combat with rivals. The frill protects the neck and serves for display, and the entire structure supports massive jaw muscles that give Triceratops a powerful bite capable of shearing through tough plant material. Triceratops lives in herds, though perhaps not the enormous aggregations seen in some hadrosaur species. Evidence from bone beds suggests groups of a few dozen individuals, possibly family units or age-segregated groups. The social dynamics of these herds are lost to us, but we can imagine dominance hierarchies established through displays and ritualized combat, with the largest horned individuals holding prime positions, access to best feeding areas, or preferential mating opportunities. Their horns show wear patterns consistent with locking horns with rivals, pushing and testing strength, though probably not fighting to the death. Tyrannosaurus rex, Triceratops' contemporary and probably its primary predator, represents the peak of large theropod evolution. Everything about T-Rex is optimized for its role as apex predator in the latest Cretaceous ecosystems of North America. The skull is massive, up to 1.5 meters long, with bone-crushing teeth and jaw muscles powerful enough to generate bite forces exceeding 6 tons. The legs are long and powerful, built for acceleration and for sustained pursuit over moderate distances. The tail is thick and muscular, serving as a counterbalance to the massive head and providing stability during hunting and feeding. The sensory capabilities of T-Rex are remarkable. Its eyes are large, positioned forward on the skull to provide excellent binocular vision and depth perception, critical for judging distances when attacking prey. The olfactory bulbs, the parts of the brain processing smell, are huge, suggesting an acute sense of smell useful for locating carcasses or tracking wounded prey. The inner ear structure suggests good hearing across a range of frequencies. T-Rex is not a simple brute, but a sophisticated predator with sensory and cognitive capabilities to match its physical prowess. Edmontosaurus, a hadrosaur living alongside Triceratops and Tyrannosaurus, represents a different solution to herbivory. Rather than armor or horns, Edmontosaurus relies on size, herding behavior, and alertness to avoid predation. Adults can reach 13 meters in length and weigh 4 tons or more. They're capable of moving on either 2 legs or 4, probably running on 2 legs when speed is necessary, but walking on all 4s when feeding or moving slowly. Their duck-like bills are perfect for cropping vegetation, and their dental batteries allow them to process enormous quantities of plant material daily. The evidence suggests Edmontosaurus is highly social. gathering in herds that might number in the hundreds during migrations or in favourable feeding areas. These herds provide safety in numbers, with many eyes watching for predators, and the confusion of a fleeing herd making it difficult for predators to single out and successfully attack an individual. The calls of hadrosaurs, resonated through their elaborate crests or inflatable nasal sacs, allow herds to maintain contact even in dense vegetation or at night, coordinating movements and alerting each other to danger. Ankylosaurus, the largest and last of the armoured dinosaurs, takes a different defensive strategy entirely. Its back is covered in thick, bony armour, its sides protected by spikes, its tail ending in a massive bony club. An adult Ankylosaurus is essentially invulnerable to predation if it can keep its armoured back toward the attacker and prevent being flipped over to expose its soft underside. The tail club, wielded with powerful muscles, can deliver devastating blows to a predator's legs or body, potentially inflicting injuries serious enough to discourage or even cripple an attacker. These dinosaurs, and dozens of other species living alongside them, represent the last chapter of dinosaurian evolution, the final refinements of lineages stretching back to the Triassic period. They're successful, abundant, well adapted, showing no awareness that their world is about to end. No sense that anything is wrong. They're simply living as their ancestors lived for 160 million years before them, and as they might have continued living for millions of years more had circumstances been different. But circumstances are what they are, and beneath the seeming stability of the late Cretaceous world, subtle changes are already underway. While dinosaurs dominate the visible world of the late Cretaceous, in the shadows and in the night, another group of animals is quietly diversifying and refining the adaptations that will allow them to inherit the Earth when the dinosaurs are gone. The mammals of the late Cretaceous are not simply waiting for their chance. They're actively evolving, experimenting with different body forms and lifestyles, becoming more diverse and sophisticated than mammals have been at any previous point in their history. The ancestors of modern mammals appeared during the Triassic period, roughly contemporary with the first dinosaurs, but for most of the Mesozoic era, mammals remained small and relatively inconspicuous. The late Cretaceous continues this pattern, but with increasing diversity and specialization. Most mammals are still small, the largest perhaps the size of a badger or small dog, but within these size constraints they're exploring numerous ecological niches. The multituberculates are perhaps the most successful mammals of the Cretaceous, a group that will persist for millions of years after the period ends, becoming the dominant small herbivores of the early Paleocene. Their name comes from the multiple tubercles, or cusps, on their teeth, structures that allow them to grind plant material efficiently. Some multituberculates are clearly adapted for life in trees, with strong limbs and grasping feet, feeding on seeds, nuts and fruits in the forest canopy. Others are ground-dwelling, living in burrows, emerging at night to feed on roots, seeds, and low-growing vegetation. Their ecological role is similar to that of modern rodents, though they're not related to rodents, and evolved their adaptations independently. The Metatherians, the group that includes modern marsupials, are diversifying during the late Cretaceous, particularly in South America and North America. Some are insectivores, hunting invertebrates in the leaf litter and understory. Others are possibly omnivorous, eating a mixed diet of insects, small vertebrates, fruits and seeds. The marsupial reproductive strategy, giving birth to tiny underdeveloped young that complete their development in a pouch, is already present, allowing these animals to reproduce with less initial investment per offspring than placental mammals require. The Eutherians, the group that includes modern placental mammals, are also diversifying, though they remain less common than multituberculates or metatherians during the Cretaceous. These early placental mammals are mostly small insectivores, probably nocturnal, with large eyes, acute hearing, and whiskers for sensing their environment in darkness. They hunt insects, worms, and other small invertebrates, occupying a niche that allows them to coexist with dinosaurs by being active when most dinosaurs are not. The importance of nocturnal habits to mammalian evolution cannot be overstated. Operating at night requires different adaptations than day-active life. Mammals develop acute hearing, able to locate prey or detect predators by sound alone. Their whiskers become sensitive tactile organs, providing information about their immediate surroundings in darkness. Their sense of smell becomes highly developed, allowing them to identify food, recognize individuals, mark territories, and detect threats. These sensory adaptations develop to cope with nocturnal life in a world dominated by day-active dinosaurs, become fundamental features of mammalian biology, persisting and being refined even in mammals that will later become diurnal. The metabolic adaptations of mammals also owe much to their Mesozoic history. True warm-bloodedness, maintaining a constant high body temperature through metabolic heat production, is energetically expensive, requiring high food intake to fuel the metabolism. But it provides advantages too, allowing sustained activity independent of environmental temperature, enabling nighttime activity when temperatures drop, permitting life in cooler climates or cooler seasons. Mammals, competing with dinosaurs that dominate daytime niches in warm climates, find success by exploiting the nighttime and cooler climate niches where their warm-bloodedness gives them an advantage. The small size of Mesozoic mammals also shapes their evolution in important ways. Small animals have high surface area to volume ratios, meaning they lose heat quickly and must eat frequently to maintain their metabolism. This drives the evolution of efficient digestive systems, the ability to extract maximum nutrition from food. It also favors reproductive strategies that allow rapid population growth, as small animals are vulnerable to predation and have short lifespans. The high reproductive rates and short generation times of mammals allow them to evolve rapidly, to adapt quickly to changing conditions, to experiment with new ecological strategies. By the late Cretaceous, mammals have been practicing and refining these adaptations for more than 100 million years. They're not primitive or inferior to dinosaurs. They're simply specialized for different niches, successful in their own right within the constraints of a world where large body size and daytime activity are dominated by dinosaurs. When the Cretaceous ends and those constraints suddenly disappear, mammals will have the tools, the adaptations, and the diversity necessary to expand rapidly into the vacated niches, but they don't know that yet. For now, they're simply living as they've always lived, in the shadows and in the night, while the dinosaurs continue their reign under the sun. And that reign continues seemingly stable, seemingly permanent, even as subtle signs of change begin to accumulate. The Cretaceous world does not end suddenly, despite what will happen on its final day. In the millions of years before the asteroid impact, the Earth is experiencing changes, subtle shifts in climate, sea level, and volcanic activity that are reshaping ecosystems in ways that might make them more vulnerable to catastrophic disruption. Understanding these background changes helps us appreciate that the world the asteroid impacts is not quite the stable, balanced world of earlier late Cretaceous times. Global temperatures during the latest Cretaceous show slight cooling trends compared to the peak warmth of the mid-Cretaceous. The difference is perhaps only a few degrees Celsius, not enough to cause mass extinction on its own, but enough to affect sea levels and ecosystem distributions. As temperatures cool, sea levels begin to drop as water is locked up in expanded polar ice, or cooled water contracts slightly. The Western Interior Seaway, that great shallow sea that split North America for millions of years, begins its slow retreat, first becoming shallower, then fragmenting into separate seaways, and eventually draining entirely shortly before the end of the period. The draining of the seaway has ecological consequences. The warm, productive marine environments it provided disappear. The coastal wetlands and estuaries where it met the land are lost. The climate-moderating effect of the seaway, keeping continental interiors warmer and wetter than they would otherwise be, diminishes. The biogeographic barrier it provided, isolating the dinosaur faunas of Laramidia and Appalachia, is removed, potentially allowing mixing of previously separated populations and creating new competitive pressures. Volcanic activity is increasing during the latest Cretaceous, particularly in what is now India. The Deccan Traps, a massive volcanic province that will eventually cover an area larger than France with lava flows, begins erupting in the final million years of the Cretaceous. These eruptions are not catastrophic volcanic explosions, but effusive eruptions. Massive volumes of lava flowing across the landscape and solidifying into basalt. The eruptions come in pulses, perhaps with quiet periods between active phases, but cumulatively they're one of the largest volcanic events in Earth's history. The environmental effects of Deccan volcanism are complex and debated. Sulfur dioxide released during eruptions reacts with water in the atmosphere to form sulfate aerosols, which reflects sunlight and cause short-term cooling. This cooling might last years or decades after each major eruption pulse, potentially stressing ecosystems adapted to warm conditions. Carbon dioxide released during eruptions contributes to long-term warming, potentially offsetting the cooling trend from other causes. Acid rain from volcanic gases could damage vegetation and acidify surface waters. The net effect of these competing influences is difficult to determine, but it's plausible that Deccan volcanism is creating environmental instability in the final years of the Cretaceous. Sea level regressions, temperature cooling, and volcanic disruption all stress ecosystems to some degree, but ecosystems are generally resilient to gradual changes. Species can migrate to track favourable climates, can evolve to tolerate new conditions, can adjust their ranges and behaviours to cope with environmental shifts. What makes ecosystems vulnerable is not gradual change, but sudden, catastrophic disruption that overwhelms their capacity to adjust. The late Cretaceous changes are creating stress, perhaps reducing ecosystem resilience, but they're not causing mass extinction on their own. The diversity of dinosaurs in the latest Cretaceous shows regional variation that might reflect these stresses. North American dinosaur diversity appears robust right up to the final extinction event. With no clear decline in the number of species, Asia also shows high diversity continuing to the end, but some regions may show earlier declines in diversity, possibly reflecting local environmental changes or possibly artifacts of an incomplete fossil record. Distinguishing real biological signals from sampling biases is challenging, and the question of whether dinosaurs were already declining before the asteroid impact remains contentious. What we can say with confidence is that the Cretaceous world in its final years is not the same as the Cretaceous world at its peak. Changes are underway. Shifts in climate and geography that are restructuring ecosystems and potentially reducing their stability. Whether these changes would have led to significant extinctions without the asteroid impact is unknowable. The asteroid does impact, and its effects are so overwhelming that any background trends become irrelevant, erased by a catastrophe that changes everything. But before that catastrophe, before the final day, the Cretaceous world continues much as it has for millions of years. Dinosaurs still the dominant large animals, ecosystems still functioning, life still flourishing across a warm planet covered in forests, grasslands not yet invented but flowering plants carpeting the earth in diversity undreamed of earlier in the Mesozoic, the seas full of life, the skies travelled by pterosaurs and birds, the nights prowled by small mammals waiting, all unknowing for their moment to come. And that moment approaches, unseen and unstoppable. The latest Cretaceous world. In the years immediately before the asteroid impact is a world at peace with itself, at least by the standards of natural ecosystems where predation and death are normal parts of the cycle of life. There are no warning signs visible to the creatures living in it, no indication that anything is about to change, no countdown ticking toward catastrophe. The dinosaurs continue their lives as their ancestors have for millions of years, unaware that their time is measured not in millions of years more but in days, hours, or minutes. On the coastal plains of North America, Triceratops herds browse on the abundant vegetation, using their powerful beaks to crop palm fronds and flowering shrubs, processing the tough plant material with their sophisticated dental batteries. Adults watch over juveniles, maintaining the social structures that have protected their kind for millennia. Tyrannosaurus rex stalks through the forests, its keen senses alert for any sign of prey or carrion, its massive body requiring constant feeding to fuel its metabolism. Hadrosaurs gather at rivers to drink, their calls echoing across the landscape, maintaining contact between members of their herds. In the polar regions, where summer brings constant daylight but winter brings darkness, dinosaurs endure the seasonal variations as they always have. Some migrate to lower latitudes for the winter, following routes they've travelled for generations. Others remain, enduring the darkness and cold, perhaps slowing their metabolisms, certainly relying on stored fat to carry them through the lean months. When spring returns and the sun climbs above the horizon once more, life quickens again, plants sprouting, animals emerging to feed and mate and begin the cycle anew. The oceans teem with life as they have throughout the Cretaceous. Mosasaurs cruise through warm waters hunting fish and sea turtles. Plesiosaurs patrol different depths and different prey niches. Ammonites drift through the water column in vast numbers, their populations numbering perhaps in the billions, representing one of the most successful animal groups ever to exist. On the seafloor, countless invertebrates filter feed, process sediment, or hunt other invertebrates, creating ecosystems as complex as any on land. The flowers that have transformed the Cretaceous world continue their mutualisms with pollinators, bees and beetles and primitive butterflies visiting flowers for nectar and pollen, inadvertently transferring pollen between plants and enabling sexual reproduction. Seeds develop and are dispersed by wind, by water, by the digestive systems of fruit-eating dinosaurs. The next generation of plants germinates, grows, matures, reproduces, continuing the cycles that have operated since flowering plants first appeared in the Cretaceous. The small mammals continue their nocturnal lives, largely invisible to the dinosaurs, hunting insects in the leaf litter, climbing trees in search of fruits and seeds, raising their young in hidden burrows and nests. They're successful in their niches, well adapted to their roles, showing no sign that they're about to inherit the earth. They're simply doing what they've always done, surviving in a world dominated by creatures much larger than themselves. There's a quality to this final moment before catastrophe that's simultaneously tragic and beautiful. All these creatures, all these species, all these lineages that represent millions of years of evolution and adaptation are living their last days or hours without knowing it. They're not in decline, not failing, not showing any sign that their world is about to end. They're successful, abundant, perfectly adapted to the world as it exists. But the world is about to change in ways that adaptation cannot prepare for, in ways that success provides no protection against. The asteroid that will end the Cretaceous is already approaching, though no creature on Earth knows it. It's been travelling through space for millions or perhaps billions of years, following an orbit that has now, by terrible chance, intersected with Earth's orbit at this particular moment in geological time. It's perhaps 10 kilometres across, a small mountain of rock and metal travelling at tens of kilometres per second relative to Earth, carrying kinetic energy equivalent to billions of nuclear weapons, and it's going to impact in what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, striking shallow tropical seas and underlying limestone bedrock in a location that will maximize the environmental effects of the impact. But the creatures of the late Cretaceous don't know any of this. They know only their immediate concerns: finding food, avoiding predators, reproducing, raising young, surviving another day. The sun rises and sets as it always has. The seasons change as they always have. Life continues as it always has, until it doesn't. And what comes next will be discussed not as a moment of death, but as a moment that defines the boundary between two great ages. Looking back across the vast span of geological time to the Cretaceous world, knowing what we now know about its end, we might ask what made that successful, thriving world vulnerable to catastrophic disruption. The answer is not simple, not a single point of failure, but rather a combination of factors that created an ecosystem resilient to normal environmental variations, but vulnerable to unprecedented catastrophe. The specialization of Cretaceous organisms was both their greatest strength and, potentially, their greatest vulnerability. Dinosaurs had evolved over 160 million years to fill almost every conceivable terrestrial ecological niche. This specialization made them extremely efficient at their particular roles. Triceratops was superbly adapted for browsing on late Cretaceous vegetation. Tyrannosaurus rex was perfectly designed for hunting late Cretaceous herbivores. But specialization can become a liability when environments change rapidly and dramatically, when the specific conditions you're adapted to suddenly no longer exist. The food chains of the late Cretaceous were long and complex, with energy flowing from plants through multiple levels of herbivores and carnivores. This complexity supported high diversity and efficient use of resources, but it also created vulnerability. When primary productivity collapses, when plants stop photosynthesizing, the effects cascade upward through the food chain. Herbivores starve first, within weeks or months. Small carnivores starve next as their prey disappears. Large carnivores, depending on both living prey and carrion, might persist longer but eventually succumb as well. The more levels in the food chain, the more vulnerable the apex species are to disruption at the base. The body size of many Cretaceous dinosaurs, while advantageous in the stable Cretaceous world, becomes a liability in crisis. Large animals require more food than small ones, both in absolute terms and relative to their population size. A Tyrannosaurus rex needs to eat perhaps its own body weight in food every week or two, requiring constant hunting or scavenging. Large herbivores need to process enormous quantities of vegetation daily. When food becomes scarce, these large-bodied animals are among the first to suffer. Small animals can subsist on smaller food sources, can find refuge in burrows or other shelters, can wait out difficult periods in ways large animals cannot. The global nature of the late Cretaceous ecosystem, with similar structures and dominant groups on most continents, means that a global catastrophe affects ecosystems worldwide simultaneously. There are no refugia, no areas that escape the impact's effects, no source populations that can recolonize devastated areas afterward with the same species. When dinosaurs go extinct, they go extinct globally and completely, leaving no survivors to rebuild their populations. Compare this to regional extinctions, where a disaster affects one area but leaves populations in other areas to eventually recolonize, and the difference becomes stark. The dependence of Cretaceous ecosystems on photosynthesis, universal to all terrestrial ecosystems, creates a single point of failure. If something disrupts photosynthesis for long enough, everything depending on it collapses. The asteroid impact's effects include a period sometimes called an _4, when dust, soot and aerosols in the atmosphere block sunlight for months or possibly years. Without sunlight, plants cannot photosynthesize. Without photosynthesis, food chains collapse from the bottom up. Organisms that can survive without photosynthesis for extended periods, whether by consuming detritus, by hibernating and waiting, or by living in ecosystems not dependent on contemporary photosynthesis, have better survival chances than those requiring fresh plant material constantly. Yet none of these vulnerabilities would matter without the asteroid impact. The Cretaceous world, despite any theoretical weaknesses, is demonstrably successful for 79 million years. Its ecosystem persists through climate fluctuations, volcanic events, sea level changes, and whatever other environmental variations the period experiences. The background extinction rate, the normal rate at which species go extinct and are replaced by new species, is low. New species continue to evolve right up to the end of the period. There's no indication of impending ecosystem collapse, no suggestion that the dinosaurs are doomed regardless of external catastrophe. What makes the Cretaceous world fragile, ultimately, is simply that it exists on a planet orbiting through space where asteroids occasionally impact, and no amount of successful adaptation to terrestrial conditions provides protection against that particular hazard. The fragility is not inherent to the ecosystem, but inherent to the situation, living on a world where catastrophic impacts, though rare on timescales of human lifespans or even human civilizations, are inevitable on geological timescales. The Cretaceous world's vulnerability is our vulnerability too, all life on Earth sharing the same fundamental exposure to cosmic hazards, the same dependence on photosynthesis and stable climate, the same complexity that creates both resilience and, sometimes, catastrophic failure modes. For millions of years before the impact, the asteroid travels through space, following its elliptical orbit around the Sun. A wanderer among countless other rocky bodies scattered throughout the solar system. Its history is ancient, perhaps dating back to the formation of the solar system itself, 4.5 billion years ago, coalescing from the same disk of dust and gas that formed the Sun and planets. For most of its existence, it follows a stable orbit that never comes close to Earth. A harmless fragment of stone and metal pursuing its endless circuit through the darkness. But orbits are not permanent. Gravitational interactions with planets, particularly Jupiter with its immense mass, can perturb asteroid orbits over millions of years, gradually shifting their paths through space. A close approach to Jupiter, or a collision with another asteroid that changes its velocity, or the subtle accumulation of many small gravitational nudges over time, can transform a stable orbit into one that crosses Earth's path. This is probably what happened to the Chicxulub impactor, some event or series of events in the millions of years before the end of the Cretaceous altered its orbit, setting it on a collision course with Earth. The asteroid itself is unremarkable, one of countless similar objects scattered through the asteroid belt and near-Earth space. It's perhaps 10 kilometers across, irregular in shape as most asteroids are, composed of rock and metal like the material that forms Earth's crust and mantle. There's nothing special about it, nothing that marks it as significant, nothing that suggests the role it will play in Earth's history. It's simply a piece of debris left over from planetary formation, a small fragment that never accreted into a larger body, now travelling through space on an unfortunate trajectory. As it approaches Earth in the final years before impact, the asteroid is invisible to any inhabitants of Earth who might look up. It's too small and too dark to see with unaided eyes, until perhaps the final days or hours before impact. No Cretaceous creature has the astronomy to predict its approach, or the technology to detect it early and calculate its trajectory. The dinosaurs and other life forms of the late Cretaceous live their lives completely unaware that death is approaching from space, that their world has an expiration date measured in years or months or days. In the final orbits before impact, the asteroid moves through near-Earth space, passing inside the Moon's orbit, drawn by Earth's gravity into a collision that becomes inevitable. Its velocity relative to Earth is tremendous, perhaps 20 or 25 kilometers per second, tens of thousands of miles per hour, a speed difficult to comprehend in human terms. At this velocity, the kinetic energy the asteroid carries is immense, something like 100 million megatons of TNT equivalent, billions of times more powerful than the largest nuclear weapons. On the final day the asteroid enters Earth's atmosphere, probably approaching from the south or southeast based on the orientation of the crater it will create. The entry happens too quickly for the object to slow down significantly. Atmospheric drag has barely any effect before impact. The asteroid punches through the atmosphere in seconds, the air ahead of it compressed and heated to incandescence, creating a fireball visible across thousands of kilometers. A new sun appearing in the sky and growing brighter by the second. Any creatures in the impact zone who happen to look up in those final seconds see something no creature should see. a piece of the cosmos itself descending on their world, trailing fire and shock waves, bringing the physics of space down to the surface where the physics of life operate. But there's no time to react, no time to flee, no time to understand. The impact occurs at velocities so extreme that normal matter behaves strangely, rock flowing like liquid, solid ground heaving like waves on an ocean, temperatures and pressures that exceed anything normally found on Earth's surface. The impact site in shallow tropical seas off the coast of what will become the Yucatan Peninsula is perhaps the worst possible location from the perspective of minimizing global environmental effects. The shallow water vaporizes instantly, adding enormous quantities of water vapor to the atmosphere. The limestone bedrock, rich in sulfur compounds and carbonates, releases sulfur dioxide and carbon dioxide when vaporized. The angle of impact, probably not quite vertical, directs maximum ejecta into the atmosphere and across the northern hemisphere. Every detail of the impact, from its size to its composition, to its location to its angle, conspires to create maximum environmental catastrophe. And then, in a geological instant, in a moment so brief it's measured in seconds or minutes rather than years or centuries, everything changes and the Cretaceous ends, and with it ends the reign of the dinosaurs that lasted for 160 million years. The immediate effects of the Chicxulub impact are beyond the scope of this gentle exploration, too violent and catastrophic for our sleep-friendly journey. But understanding what comes after the initial impact, the days and months and years of environmental disruption, helps us appreciate what was lost and what, remarkably, survived. The impact creates a crater more than 180 kilometers across, excavating rock from deep in the Earth's crust and scattering it across the planet. The energy released is so vast that it vaporizes rock, sends shock waves through the solid Earth that are recorded in seismographs all around the world, creates tsunamis hundreds of meters high that devastate coastlines thousands of kilometers from the impact site. But these immediate effects, while devastating, are localized to North America and the Gulf of Mexico region. The global effects come from what the impact puts into the atmosphere. Dust and small particles thrown into the upper atmosphere by the impact block's sunlight for months or longer, creating a period sometimes called an impact winter. Temperatures drop globally as sunlight cannot penetrate the dust cloud. Photosynthesis slows and then stops in most regions as plants cannot access the light they need. This collapse of primary productivity cascades through food webs, causing starvation and ecosystem collapse worldwide. Herbivores that depend on fresh vegetation die within weeks or months. Carnivores that depend on those herbivores follow shortly after. Ecosystems that can subsist on detritus, on dead organic matter, or that can hibernate or slow their metabolism to near zero during the crisis, have better chances of survival. Acid rain falls globally as sulfur dioxide from the impact reacts with water vapor in the atmosphere, creating sulfuric acid that acidifies surface waters and damages plants. Ocean surface layers become more acidic, causing massive die-offs of calcareous plankton and other organisms with shells or skeletons made of calcium carbonate. This marine extinction is as severe as the terrestrial extinction, with species like ammonites, mosasaurs and plesiosaurs disappearing completely, along with countless species of fish, invertebrates, and marine microorganisms. The extinction is selective, not random. Large-bodied animals suffer disproportionately, as their high food requirements make them vulnerable to disruption in food supply. Terrestrial animals suffer more than freshwater, or marine animals in some cases, as freshwater ecosystems can be buffered against some effects, and marine ecosystems have detritus-based food chains that don't depend on contemporary photosynthesis. Animals capable of dormancy, hibernation, or surviving on stored resources have advantages over those requiring constant feeding. Animals with wide geographic ranges and broad ecological tolerances fare better than specialists adapted to narrow niches. But the extinction, while severe, is not complete. Perhaps 75% of species go extinct, a catastrophic loss but also a 25% survival rate. Birds survive, though many lineages go extinct, leaving a reduced diversity that will eventually rediversify in the Paleocene. Mammals survive with their small size, their ability to burrow, their omnivorous and insectivorous diets, providing advantages during the crisis. Crocodilians survive, possibly by their ability to go long periods without feeding and by living in aquatic environments where detritus-based food chains persist. Turtles, lizards, snakes, and amphibians survive, though with reduced diversity. The recovery takes time, measured in thousands or millions of years depending on which aspects of the ecosystem we consider. Plant communities recover relatively quickly once light returns and photosynthesis can resume, with opportunistic species colonizing disturbed areas and gradually being replaced by more complex communities. Animal populations take longer to recover as reproduction is slower and ecosystems must rebuild from small surviving populations. The full recovery of ecosystem complexity and diversity comparable to the late Cretaceous takes millions of years, the Paleocene and Eocene periods witnessing the gradual reconstruction of complex food webs and the evolution of new lineages to fill niches left vacant by the extinction. What emerges from the recovery is a world fundamentally different from the Cretaceous, dominated by mammals rather than dinosaurs, by a different assemblage of plant species, by ecosystems structured differently than those that came before. The boundary between Cretaceous and Paleocene represents not just a change in dominant species, but a change in the fundamental character of terrestrial life, a regime shift from one stable state to another, from the dinosaurian world that persisted for 160 million years to the mammalian world that will persist, in various forms, for the 66 million years from the extinction to our present day. Yet despite the magnitude of change, despite the extinction and the restructuring, life persists, adapts, and eventually flourishes again, demonstrating a resilience that operates over geological timescales. The story of the Cretaceous period and its ending carries meanings that extend beyond paleontology, beyond dinosaurs, into questions about impermanence, adaptation, resilience, and our own place in the vast sweep of Earth's history. When we contemplate what the Cretaceous teaches us, we're really asking what it means to exist for a time, to thrive, and then to give way to what comes next. One lesson is about the fragility of even successful systems. The dinosaurs were not failing when they went extinct. They were successful, abundant, diverse, well adapted to their world. But success provides no immunity to catastrophic disruption. No amount of adaptation to one set of conditions prevents vulnerability to radically different conditions, especially conditions that appear suddenly without time for adaptation. This speaks to a deeper truth about existence itself, that thriving and surviving are not permanent states but temporary conditions, that everything that lives does so contingently, depending on circumstances that can change in ways both gradual and catastrophic. Another lesson concerns deep time and perspective. The Cretaceous period lasted 79 million years. The entire reign of the dinosaurs from their appearance in the Triassic to their extinction at the end of the Cretaceous spanned 160 million years. These time spans are so vast as to be almost incomprehensible, dwarfing not just individual lifespans, but the entire history of human civilization, the entire history of our species, the entire history of our genus. Against this backdrop, our concerns and achievements take on a different character, neither meaningless nor all-important, but simply our chapter in a much longer story. The extinction itself teaches about change and continuity. Yes, the dinosaurs went extinct, except for the lineage that became birds. Yes, 75% of species disappeared, but life continued. The ecosystems rebuilt themselves. New species evolved to fill vacated niches. The Earth recovered, eventually becoming as rich in life as it was before the extinction, though with different actors in the major roles. This suggests a kind of resilience in life itself, not in any particular species or lineage, but in the planetary biosphere as a whole, capable of surviving even catastrophic disruptions and rebuilding complexity over time. The survival of small mammals through the extinction while large dinosaurs perished teaches about the advantages of being adaptable versus being optimized. Mammals were generalists, capable of eating various foods, living in various habitats, tolerating a range of conditions. Dinosaurs, particularly large ones, were often more specialized, finely tuned to particular niches. In stable conditions, specialization is advantageous, allowing efficient exploitation of resources. But in crisis, generalization provides flexibility to cope with changing circumstances. This tension between optimization and adaptability is fundamental to evolution, and, by extension, to any system that must balance performance and robustness. Perhaps the most profound lesson is about impermanence and the value of existence even when it's temporary. The Cretaceous ended. The dinosaurs went extinct. But their time was not therefore meaningless or worthless. For 79 million years, the Cretaceous world was beautiful, complex, full of life pursuing its imperatives to eat, reproduce, survive, exist. That this world ended does not negate its existence. That the dinosaurs are gone does not erase the fact that they were here, that they lived, that they were real, and experienced their reality in whatever way dinosaurs experienced such things. This applies to us as well, individually and collectively. We exist for a time, our civilizations exist for a time, our species will exist for a time and then will not, whether through extinction or evolution into something else. But the temporariness of existence doesn't negate its value while it lasts. We're here now, in this moment, part of the same planetary story that included the dinosaurs, and will include whatever comes after us. Our chapter, like the Cretaceous chapter, will end, but it is still our chapter to live. Finally, the Cretaceous teaches patience and the long view. The changes that shape the Cretaceous world, the drifting continents, the evolving ecosystems, the slow accumulation of diversity, happened across time spans that make human lives irrelevant as units of measurement. Yet we can study these changes, can understand them, can place ourselves in context with them. This ability to comprehend deep time, to see ourselves as part of a story spanning hundreds of millions of years, is perhaps uniquely human, a form of consciousness that allows us to transcend our temporal limitations, at least intellectually, and to understand our place in something vastly larger than ourselves. And from that understanding can come not anxiety about impermanence, but peace in accepting our role in the larger pattern. There is a particular kind of peace that comes from contemplating deep time, from allowing your mind to stretch backward across millions and hundreds of millions of years, to understand yourself not as separate from Earth's history, but as a small part of its ongoing story. This peace doesn't come from denying the reality of change or extinction or impermanence, but from accepting these things and seeing them in proper perspective, understanding that they're not aberrations but fundamental aspects of how existence works on geological timescales. When you think about the Cretaceous dinosaurs going about their lives, unaware that their time was limited, you might feel sadness for them, but there's another way to frame it that brings comfort rather than sorrow. They lived. For 160 million years, dinosaurs existed, inhabited nearly every terrestrial ecosystem on Earth, evolved into thousands of species, each one a successful solution to the challenges of existence in its particular time and place. That their reign ended doesn't diminish what they were or what they accomplished simply by existing and persisting for so long. The same perspective applies to the Cretaceous world itself. That warm, flowering planet with its complex ecosystems and its balanced food webs and its life filling every available niche. It existed for 79 million years, more than enough time for countless generations of every species, for uncountable individual lives lived from beginning to end. for the slow working of evolution to refine and perfect and create new forms. Yes, it ended, but it also was, and the fact of its existence is not negated by the fact of its ending. This perspective offers comfort when we contemplate our own existence and the existence of things we care about. Everything is temporary on geological timescales. Every species, every ecosystem, every civilization, every individual. But temporary doesn't mean meaningless. The Cretaceous world was meaningful to the creatures that lived in it, just as our world is meaningful to us. The fact that both will end, that all things end, doesn't erase the reality and value of the time they exist. There's also peace in understanding that we're not separate from this process, but part of it. The atoms that make up your body are ancient, forged in stars that died before our solar system formed, cycled through countless organisms over billions of years. You're made of recycled matter, your substance borrowed temporarily from the planet and destined to return to it, to be incorporated into other living things in an endless cycle of construction and dissolution and reconstruction. You're not separate from nature, from Earth's history, from the long story of life on this planet. You are part of it, as fully as any Cretaceous dinosaur was part of it. The Cretaceous world teaches us that stability is always temporary, and that this is not a reason for despair, but simply a fact to be accepted. The stable Cretaceous climate lasted for tens of millions of years, then changed. The dinosaur dominance lasted for 160 million years, then ended. Our current geological period, the Quaternary, with its ice ages and interglacials, will eventually give way to something else. Our species will eventually go extinct or evolve into something different. Our individual lives will end. These are certainties, and accepting them, truly accepting them, creates a kind of peace that comes from no longer fighting against fundamental realities. But there's also peace in recognizing continuity within change. Life didn't end when the dinosaurs went extinct. It transformed. The mammals that survived went on to diversify and create new forms and fill the planet with life again. The birds, dinosaur descendants, still fly in our skies, direct continuations of lineages that extend back through the Cretaceous into the Jurassic and beyond. The flowering plants that transformed the Cretaceous world still dominate terrestrial ecosystems today. The story continues even when particular chapters end, and we are part of that continuation, living chapters in a story that began billions of years ago and will continue for billions of years more, long after humans are gone. When you rest with these thoughts, when you let your mind drift among the deep time perspectives that the Cretaceous offers, you might find that the worries of your immediate life, while still real and important within their context, seem less overwhelming, less all-consuming. They're part of your story, your chapter, but they're not the whole story, not even close. You are here for a time, experiencing your moment of existence, and that is enough, because it has to be enough, because it's all any of us get, whether we're humans living for decades or dinosaurs living for millions of years. The Cretaceous is gone, but it was here, and in being here it was complete, and there is peace in that completeness. We've travelled together now for more than 2 hours, drifting backward through time to the Cretaceous period, exploring that ancient world not at the moment of its ending, but in its fullness, in its 79 million years of life and complexity and beauty. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey, for giving me your time and your attention, for allowing me to guide you through deep time to a world that was once as real as our own, from the opening of the Cretaceous 145 million years ago, through the breaking apart of continents and the warming of the global climate, through the revolution of flowering plants and the diversification of dinosaurs into their peak forms, through complex ecosystems balanced and thriving, through seasonal cycles and food webs and all the intricate mechanisms of life. We've explored not just what existed, but what it meant to exist in that time, in that place, in that particular configuration of Earth's long story. The question I asked at the beginning, or perhaps the question implicit in choosing this topic, was what can we learn from the world right before everything changed? And the answer, as honestly as I can give it, is this. We learn that success and adaptation and complexity provide no immunity to catastrophic change. But we also learn that existence has value independent of duration, that the Cretaceous world was meaningful and real and worthy of wonder, even though it ended, just as our world and our lives are meaningful and real, and worthy of wonder, even though they too will end. If you've enjoyed this slow drift through the Cretaceous, if you found it helpful for rest or for learning, or simply for shifting your perspective to geological timescales, I'd be grateful if you'd leave a like or subscribe to find more journeys like this one. And if you have thoughts about this topic or requests for future explorations, the comments are always open. To those already subscribed, thank you for being part of this community of people who find peace in contemplating deep time. Wherever you are in the world right now, whatever time it is, whatever brought you to this moment of rest, I hope you found some comfort here. I hope your breathing has slowed since we began. I hope your thoughts have quieted. I hope your body feels heavy and warm and ready for sleep. Look up at the stars if you can, or imagine them if you cannot. All those distant suns shining in the darkness, most of them older than our solar system, some of them hosting planets of their own, perhaps planets where life exists in forms we cannot imagine. The same stars that shone down on the Cretaceous world shine down on us now, patient and enduring, witnessing Earth's long story from beginning to whatever end awaits. We are part of that story, this brief moment of consciousness arising from matter, contemplating itself, understanding its place in deep time, and finding peace in that understanding. The Cretaceous is gone, but we are here, and that is enough. Sleep well. Dream of warm Cretaceous forests, if you will, of vast herds of hadrosaurs calling across river valleys, of sauropods reaching into the canopy, of flowering plants carpeting the earth, of a world complete in its moment of existence, even though that moment eventually ended, as all moments must, rest now. Let the weight of deep time settle over you like a warm blanket, comforting rather than frightening, a reminder that you are part of something larger and older, and more enduring than any individual worry or fear. The story continues, life continues, and for now, for this night, you can rest. Good night.